another edition of Bunker Office Hours, a weekly live show brought to you by the team at Bunker Labs, a national network of veteran and military spouse entrepreneurs dedicated to helping the military connected community start and grow their own business. I'm your host, Iron Mike Stedman, today, joined by my co-host, Amy Morrington, and our special guest, Aaron Eden from Intuit Customer Success. We're going to be talking about some design thinking and this amazing course we have coming up available for the Bunker. But before we do that, I'm going to pass it over to Amy to talk about any updates that are taking place in the Bunker.
Hold on. For once, I'm not prepared because we are using Zoom and it has thrown me off. Okay, I am ready now. Sorry. Okay, coming up, as we have talked about the last several weeks, we have the Veterans in Residence 22V showcase across 23 cities, June 1st. So if you want to find your nearest city, you can go to bunkerlabs.org, veterans-showcase, and then find a nearest city for that. And then also applications are open for the USAA 100th anniversary pitch competition in Seattle. Also, interest forms are open for Charlotte for that as well. And then finally, we've got Breaking Barriers in Entrepreneurship Workshop applications are open. So bunkerlabs.org/breaking-barriers for that. And that is an 8-week workshop series, virtual workshop series. So that is open to people across the country. Founders who are Hispanic, Black, female, or Asian American are open for that guide.
Yeah. So needless to say, there's a lot of opportunity out there. That's one thing we always trying to reinforce. Take advantage of these programs. Get out there and apply. Breaking Barriers is an amazing program. I had a chance to teach marketing and branding in it for many cohorts. And so just be on the lookout, apply, and take advantage of all these opportunities out there. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Aaron, to talk about design thinking. You hear it brought up in different names, human-centered design. And I think what's interesting about you, Aaron, is you come from a very entrepreneurial background. So you're not just some, guy in a lab. It's like, oh, design thinking. No, you're a seasoned entrepreneur at this point. You started, I think it's Startup Tucson. Is that what it's called?
That's right. Yep.
As well as multiple ventures. So we're excited to have you here. And
I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Let's start out by having you introduce yourself to the Bunker and your background. And let's talk about the upcoming course we're going to have available.
Cool. Yeah. So you hit the highlights there. I'm also an Army veteran. So been on both the government side of things, the enterprise side of things, and the startup side of things. So played in lots of different spaces there. I started my first company when I was 12, based on copyright infringement, which I didn't know. My mom helped me find out that was the case. I learned that I could draw the Ghostbusters 2 logo really well on a poster, and me and my brother and sister would go out in front of the CVS and sell posters to people as they were coming through to try to get money for a Nintendo. So I'm currently an end-to-end BSA at Intuit. What that basically means is that I'm a technology translator. So I sort of sit in between our technology teams and some of our business teams, and help make sure that the business teams are getting what they need from the technology teams and vice versa. I've been back at Intuit this time around for just about 18 months. And prior to that, I had a consulting company where I was going around and applying these design thinking principles in large enterprises. So helping them launch new products and services, which the fundamentals and the foundations of all of that are consistent between startups, government, and enterprise. The way that you behave and the way that you learn from your customers, all those things are consistent. The things that are different are that in a startup, you have significantly limited resources, whereas in an enterprise, you actually have exactly the opposite problem, which is you have almost unlimited resources, which presents its own issues. So this course that Mike was just bringing up is really, how to apply these design thinking principles in a startup where you have those limited resources, where time is your most valuable commodity, right? How do you go deep with your customers, understand them at an emotional level, so you're solving a really important problem for them, And then how do you separate what they say versus what they do by running behavioral experiments with them to know that the business model that you're designing will actually work with them as early as possible and get that risk off the table, so that you have the best shot possible at a scalable business model.
So I host a transition podcast, and I spend a lot of time in the weeds with a lot of early stage founders. And you're right. Like at the very beginning, you're prioritizing so many different things. It's like you've got to validate the business model. You know, if you're one of one, right, you've got to build all the assets, the marketing. You're doing everything.
Everything.
At what point are you encouraging people to think about design thinking during this process? Because if I'm a founder, I'm saying, Aaron, I'm overwhelmed already. And now you're telling me design thinking when I need to put money in the bank account? Totally.
Yeah. The way to think about it is not extra work up front, but different work up front. So a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we focus on the fun and the sexy tasks. So we go and design a logo, we go and build out some business cards, we go start doing networking events and talking to people about this new idea that we've got. And those activities are important, but it's a matter of sequencing, right? And so if you start by really focusing deeply on your customers and understanding the problems that they have and understanding how you can best solve those problems, you're actually going to identify how to get to revenue much more quickly because you're focused on a problem that they want to have solved and that hopefully they're already looking for a solution to. And so it's really about just changing the sequence that you're doing things. That you're gonna learn these things no matter what. You're gonna learn what's important to your customers. The goal is learn them today rather than learning them 2 years from now after you've already built a team and built a product and find out that it's the wrong product. That's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid building things that customers really don't care about, and learn what they do care about as early as possible to increase our chances of success.
So I know one thing is human-centered design thinking is big out on the West Coast and Silicon Valley.
Yeah, totally.
And I know for a fact that you're right. A lot of government institutions are starting to use it. It's starting to spread out more across the board. A lot of our audience are small business owners. Can it be applied there as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, in the course, I actually give an example where like I applied it with my family because my daughter wanted to win a contest. And so like we did some brainstorming as a family to figure out what were the possible places we might take photos for her to win this contest. And then we did some narrowing and aligning that. So it can be applied pretty much anywhere there's some sort of problem that you need solved, you could apply it. Specifically for small businesses, if I'm an existing business, it works really well to identify what is it about your business that's really working well and amplify that. So where should you, where are the areas where maybe you're not adding value for your customers and how could you remove those? So if I've got an existing business, it applies really well there. If I've got a brand new business, like I mentioned before, it's how do I get the risk off the table as quickly as possible, so that I know I'm building something that's important. If you think about what normally happens, like as an entrepreneur, let's say I'm a year into the process and maybe I've got three or four customers. I've got sort of a minimum viable product built, and like it's looking like it's working. And I want to go after trying to get some investors to invest in my business. When I start asking those investors to look at my business, what are they going to do? They're going to identify what are the risk points in my business that would keep them from potentially investing in my business. And that's exactly the same thing you should be looking at as an entrepreneur. What are those risk points? And how do I generate evidence or generate data that says that thing is not a risk and I should continue forward? If it is a risk, then I got to figure out how to solve it. And it's going to be a barrier to me growing a big, successful business. So short answer is, design thinking applies in all of these different contexts. It might be where you apply it might be slightly different depending on what stage of maturity your business is at, but it does apply in all stages.
So I remember design thinking started to really pop up on the scene, I think in the early like 2010 or so, around that area.
Sounds about right. Yep.
Have you seen it change since then and now about how people are utilizing it?
Yeah, the ways that it changes is with all of these kinds of methodologies and frameworks and those kinds of things. Um, individual techniques inside the toolbox kind of change here and there. The biggest thing that's probably happened over the last 10 years or so is that if you look at some of the principles around lean startup, the lean startup movement really kind of sparked around that time. And there's a lot of really positive and valuable overlap between what design thinking teaches and what lean startup teaches. And so those two have become really deeply intertwined. And so, the lean startup really focuses on those same things. What are the risks to the business? How do I go and run experiments in lightweight ways with minimum viable products with my customers to de-risk the business? Well, that's the same kind of stuff that design thinking is teaching. And lean startup started adding some very specific like ways of running those landing page experiments or video experiments or some of these kinds of things.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
It's really valuable.
I see the connection with design thinking and the lean startup, the business model canvas. You see them
totally
intertwined. And are we going to be able to see that in the course as well? So will there be an opportunity to learn about the business model canvas?
No, the business model canvas is not included in there. But the way to think about it is really like if you, let's say you're a day one business and you map out what you think your business model is in that business model canvas, that is exactly the right level of fidelity to have at that point, right? That it's a sketch on that you probably spent 30 minutes or an hour on saying like, here's what I think my business model is. Because all of those things are assumptions at that point, right? And so that basically gives you your roadmap for what you need to go learn from your customers. And so this design thinking course really just guides you right through that. So it starts with, hey, we need to first go figure out whether the customers you put in that customer box of the business model canvas, are those customers, do they exist? Do they have a problem that they really want solved? Are they looking for a solution for it? Or would they pay for a solution? Right. And so like, if that box, the customer box in the business model canvas ends up that it's wrong, the rest of the business model canvas gets blown up. Right. So you've got to focus on, are the customers real and do they want a problem? Do they have a problem that they want solved? And so no, it's not included, but the approach and the process is directly intertwined, and it could be used really well together with it.
I think you just brought up a good point though. With all these methodologies, particularly design thinking, it's important to have some form of feedback from your customers. So you actually have to get out there and test assumptions. And I remember when I was learning design thinking at Stanford, I did the program Stanford Ignite, and we had a whole module on design thinking. I've got to experience it at NJIT too. One of the things they had us do right off the bat was talk to humans. So it was like you make your assumptions and you get out there, you start talking to people. How important is that for our audience to understand?
So I co-founded Startup Tucson. I also mentioned that for the last 7 years before coming back to Intuit that I've been running a consulting company where I've been helping big companies to apply this. In that process, I had designed what I called a 3-day boot camp, which was basically teaching these principles to folks with real projects over the course of 3 days. To give you an example and tell you how important I think that is, in a 3-day workshop, we would have all of the participants out engaging with real customers 45 minutes after the workshop started. So like a little bit of like, what is this stuff? What should I be doing? How does this work? And then like, boom, get out and start learning from your customers. Because if you think about, I described before, like, hey, you spent 30 minutes mapping out your business model canvas. And that's the perfect amount of fidelity for a brand new startup, because the value that you create as an entrepreneur doesn't happen in your office. It doesn't happen at home. It doesn't happen in the co-working space where you're renting space. It happens when you're out with your customers and learning from your customers. And the number one job of an entrepreneur is to learn about your customers and learn what problems they want solved. You're learning about that the entire time you have a business, because things change, right? What customers care about changes. So even though at the beginning you understood those customers really well, as time goes on, you have to continue learning from them and continue experimenting, because the world changes. You got to keep up with it.
Yeah, I call it getting that market-based feedback. It's one thing to have these assumptions from the comfort of our apartments and our offices, et cetera. But it's another thing to get out there in the market and you start getting punched in your face, and you're like, oh, you really want that? Now, I'm familiar with this whole movement around jobs to be done, which is really starting to think about like, what is the specific problem people need solved? Is that also related with design thinking?
Yeah, the question you asked before about how it's changed, I'd say that's another area that it's really over the last 10 years or so, another area that intertwines really well, right? So you could think about the jobs to be done framework as, as you do this empathy, work, it's another area that you can question, and it helps entrepreneurs really separate in the early stages. It's very easy for us to be just humans and be very attached to our idea. And one of the things jobs to be done, I think, helps us do is really separate what's going on with our customers between the pains that they want solved, between what the outcomes are they're trying to accomplish, or what the jobs are they want done, and what our solution is. They're kind of layers to that, right? It's almost like kind of peeling back the onion and looking at those different layers as you build through it. So also a very complementary framework. And I think the customer empathy activities that we go through in the course are directly aligned with what you would do with jobs to be done. It'd just be a question that you ask during the interaction with the customer, or something that you observe during the interaction with the customer that tells you, hey, there's a job that needs to be done here, and mapping that out.
So what it sounds to me like, design thinking is really the foundation for a lot of these new kind of concepts that have been introduced, right? Yep. So, as time goes on, people come up with their different frameworks, but it all traces its origin back to that kind of human-centered design, like really getting intimate and understand the problem that your customers are facing. And what design thinking allows us to do is ask the right questions and have a framework for getting to the right solutions.
That's very, very well said. I think if you were asking somebody that started with jobs to be done or started with lean startup, they would probably tell you jobs to be done is the core, and design thinking helps you get there. And so, like, I think that triad of those three different frameworks is extremely valuable. But which one is the underlying architecture could be debated. But maybe that's not so important. It's more important to know, like, hey, these are all complementary. They're valuable. You should use them together. It doesn't matter which one came first or which one you like best.
So, Aaron, I got to give you a confession. Right?
Uh-oh.
A little skeptical about design thinking for a lot of the bunker, because I know the challenges a lot of these early stage entrepreneurs are facing, even just getting their messaging right. However, once I found out that you were responsible for the course and your background and everything, I have a lot more confidence in it now, because again, you bring that entrepreneurial mindset. You're not just creating this in a bubble. You've been through there. So I think that's going to be hugely valuable through the content that you're creating in the course.
Not only that, my personal experiences, but I've seen hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs apply this successfully and build successful businesses. And I've also seen enterprises apply it and drive, I would guess, probably $500 million, $1 billion worth of business impact across many companies in the globe. So I know that these principles and these tools work. No doubt about that. One thing I just want to comment on is that I think, as an Army veteran, if you think about what happens in basic training and AIT and in most cases, your entire military career, what's beaten into you? What's beaten into you is that you do things, you execute flawlessly, right? You do it over and over again without mistake, and mistakes are not acceptable, right? But as an entrepreneur, the world is flipped. It's exactly the opposite. You are here to learn. You're here to make mistakes. You're here to figure out what actually is the business model that your customers care about and what problem you can solve for them. And so it's very likely that the idea that you come up with, actually, I wouldn't even say very likely. The idea you come up with on day one is not the idea that will be successful. That's never the case. There's always something different about it. It might be something minor, but there's always something different about it. And so I think, from a place of being skeptical and those kinds of things, I think that's the hardest thing for for a veteran entrepreneur to work through is viewing the world differently, and making sure that those principles of flawless execution, they don't apply yet. They will later when you have a bigger successful business, and that'll be really important. But right now it's learning, it's discovery, it's exploring, it's trying to find the answers to these questions. And so the way that you can apply that strength that you have in flawless execution is to learn a process like design thinking and flawlessly execute the design thinking process. And in doing that, it'll enable you to learn what you need to learn to grow a successful business.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to transition to one of my favorite part of office hours and give a book recommendation. And also in the time we have left, if there's any viewers that have a question for Aaron, anything regarding design thinking and what we talked about today, feel free to go ahead and drop it in the chat. And so Aaron, for people interested in learning design thinking or how it applies to business, what book recommendations do you have for people?
I was thinking a more general book recommendation. So let me give a
book works.
We'll do both. I'll stall with the general book recommendation and I'll give you a design thinking one. I've learned most of my design thinking through practice. So that'll take a second, but a book that I've been geeking out on recently is called Life 3.0. As a technology geek, I've been really fascinated and learning a lot around machine learning and artificial intelligence and these kinds of things. And in this book, he sort of goes into how artificial intelligence could potentially be sort of, as humans, our next level of evolution, and like how that might play out in the future, and what are some of the things we need to watch out for. So really sort of mind-bending book that not only helps you see what's possible with some of these things, but see maybe how it could play out in the future. So on the design thinking front, I'd say probably two things you should check out. Number one is there's a really great book called Game Storming that has a bunch of different design thinking type exercises in it that you can do. And it basically maps out like, hey, here's a situation that you're in where this tool might apply, and then walks you through how to apply the tool and what you might get out of it. I find that really valuable to just, sometimes you get into a rut of applying the same types of techniques over and over again. It's a good way to kind of break out of that frame and be able to grow. And then the second one, we've sort of touched on it a little bit, but the original Lean Startup book, it changed my life. Really extremely powerful approaches and techniques in there, and some great stories to get your entrepreneurial juices flowing around how you might apply some of these techniques. Get some inspiration that way.
Yeah, and he's talking about the Lean Startup by Eric Ries, or as Al Ries or Eric Ries? Eric Ries, yeah.
Yep.
My book recommendation for the week is a throwback called Getting Real by 37 Signals. I'm a big fan of Jason Fried and a lot of the content that they put out. And they put out this book probably, I don't know, like 10 years ago or so. And they released it by PDF. And it's just such a fantastic book about how to bootstrap a software startup and some principles. And I really resonate with a lot of the philosophies that are coming out of 37 Signal. And a lot of that kind of human-centered focus is even in these texts about build software products that solve real problems for real people, and just find their whole philosophy as a company. So I highly recommend you all check out anything put out by 37 Signals. Not only do they have Getting Real, but they also have the Rework book, which is great. And I listen to their podcast and everything. So I've been geeking out on it. But Getting Real is kind of like that foundational text. I think that was one of the first books that they put out. And this has just been part of their company's philosophy around how they work. So check that out. As we wrap up here, Aaron, any closing remarks would you like to leave with our listeners today and get them fired up for the upcoming course?
Oh, man, the words of wisdom. I think being a great entrepreneur is really about just getting out and doing it. And I think, there's a famous quote, and I'm forgetting who it's from, so I apologize for not attributing, but it's not mine. There's a really great quote that talks about if you want to go really fast, go alone. If you want to go really far, go together. And I think, as an entrepreneur, looking at how you can create a movement around your startup, so that not only can you attract amazing customers and build a successful business, but you can attract amazing team members that want to go after solving the same problem. And so all of that, in order to be successful at doing that, requires narrowing in on a really important customer problem that you can solve, that others are excited by solving as well. And that's how you go and build a big successful business.
Love it. I'm all about that in Web 3.0. Collaboration is the name of the game. Stop trying to solve everything by yourself. Find people that share the same values and principles as you, and let's build together. And Aaron, on behalf of the Bunker, we really appreciate you and all the work you're doing to bring this course to life and Intuit in general, just being an amazing partner and supporter of the veteran entrepreneurial community. And it's great to have a fellow veteran in these roles that can understand our perspective and understand the challenges that we're facing. So it's been an honor to have you on Office Hours today, and we're looking forward to the course. And my skepticism, I'm excited to check it out.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you having me.
For everyone tuning in, do me a favor. First, make sure you subscribe to the Transition Podcast and newsletter. We've got amazing content. Last week, I released an episode with Yusef Henriquez, who is actually building some technology to serve indigenous, African-American, and people of color in general on healthcare, right? So they're aggregating data that hasn't been out there before to create more healthcare solutions. And so you want to check out that podcast. It's absolutely amazing. Listen to the podcast by Patrick Fitzgerald on how to develop your first business plan. That is going to be super important for a lot of you out there, especially with what we talked about today. You start applying that human-centered design to how you start thinking about building out your business. And check out a lot of other amazing content that we're releasing for you every week on the Transition Podcast. Make sure you head over to bunkerlabs.org, sign up for our newsletter, and get plugged into the ecosystem. We got programs that will take you from idea to invoice, incubate you, and position to grow alongside other founders and CEOs. We're putting a lot of great content out there to support you, a lot of great programs. Make sure you're taking advantage of it, and be sure to spread the word. And so it's great having you all on here today. And until next week, everyone, peace, love, and have a great rest of your week.